In this video, I'm going to be showing you how I spent the last 8 months of my life building this massive set of cathedrals in the snowy tundras of Minecraft. Let's get to it. Before the video begins, I ask that you hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. I read every single one of them and take your ideas into consideration for all of my future projects. Before jumping into any build of mine, I always like to do some research on the style of architecture I'm going after and the typical landscape that surrounds it. Once I have a very basic understanding of what is to come, I formulate a few quick sketches to rely on while building and load up the world to get started. I began the build by creating a basic outline of the main mountain where the largest cathedral would stand, and then filling the slopes to the peak, eventually adding 4 sub-mountains where the smaller watches would stand. I really wanted this to be a sort of intimidating sight to come up on, with massive castles towering over the terrain on their high peaks. With the basic terrain finished, I switched the biome to a snowy tundra and made a few custom trees to scatter throughout the roots of the mountains to form a small forest. Once the terrain was complete, I focused my attention to the largest mountain where the biggest cathedral named Saxeus Castle would be located. Now, the trend of Latin names would not be forgotten, but rather given to each of the surrounding castles as well. Building out the main cathedral's foundation based on my sketches and then moving in to add the upper levels as well as some additional lower base details gave the build a sloping shape down to the forest, and this was something I had been after from the beginning. The first 2 towers, acting as one of 4 main entrances from the eventual bridges that would be built, came as a bit of a shock as far as difficulty goes. I did not, however, make a sketch of this tower like I would do for the others in the future, so perhaps that led to my struggles with the initial design and the overall block palette. Once finished with the first entrance and my buttresses on the right hand side, I moved over to the left of the cathedral to take on yet another tower. Each structure, when I started building and getting familiar with the style, took hours of additional research and sketching to achieve a custom yet familiar build, and this tower was definitely no exception. I then moved on to more structures clinging to the side of the cathedral, additional buttresses for support, as well as pasting buttresses from the right hand side over to the left wall to act as main stylized support systems for the foundation of Saxeus Castle. With these structures complete, I was not entirely satisfied with the angle the overall build was creating, and to imply a more gradual decline, I worked in 2 more structures, one of which being a small chapel with a lone tower to support the building leaning on the base of the castle, and the other being a low cathedral to act as a building for the larger buttresses to lean on. Throughout the build, I was constantly chasing the idea of one structure leaning onto the next to create a beautiful network of buttresses and to achieve a solid sort of look to the build that I feel many Gothic structures so perfectly achieve. creating more 3D blueprints, I was able to complete the design for the back side of the castle. I now tackled another tower, this one being my largest and most complex, but no less rewarding, as it was different from any other build so far, and it consisted of 4 protruding sub-towers and a coned roof as its crown. Moving right next door, I tackled my second main entrance to the cathedral, which would consist of 2 towers guarding, in a sense, the tunnel that would lead to the heart of the structure. These towers were specifically odd due to their diagonal nature and the fact that they did not want to create a shape I was ever really happy with. I created another small chapel atop the tower's entrance to fill the space and then moved directly onto my third and favorite entrance to the cathedral. This is a very unique entrance because I had decided to tackle diagonal and straight based builds together to form a large and intimidating structure standing before the rest of the build. The back entrance was something that I struggled to formulate for a long time because I never really knew what to add that would fill such a large and grand space. When taking a look back at inspirational images I had collected at the beginning of the project, I noticed these slanted fronts that appeared on some structures, and I used its features for the first time out of many. Wrapping up the base of the main cathedral, I built one last entrance. This one not being in the form of a bridge, but rather a steep staircase, not unlike the back entrance I had just worked on. Moving upwards, I began to fill in the top of the cathedral. On the steeper side of the upper levels, I built a long row of very large buttresses, followed by a smaller row to support the side of the building. Afterward, I turned my attention to building the classic Gothic entrance designs with 2 towers upon either side and supporting buttresses for the upper levels of the cathedral. To top off Saxeus Castellum with a proper crown and a peak to its rising slopes of Gothic architectural design, I create one last tower. Being this far along in the build, I'm proud to say that due to my familiarity with the style, I didn't even have to form a sketch or plan too far ahead with the layout. And with that said, the largest of the cathedrals is complete. After slightly tweaking the terrain to better fit the bridges in their centers, I move into the first out of 4 watches or sub-cathedrals in the build, the first of which being named the Lonely Chapel, the only building that does not have a Latin name associated with it. The chapel stands alone between 2 broken off bridges that lead further from and towards Saxeus Castellum, perhaps broken down by beasts of old. It is built on a peculiar diagonal that made the build specifically difficult out of the 4 to design. I give the chapel a main tower, a common trend you will see through all 4 watches, as to give it that menacing steep point and to guide the eyes upwards. Once completed, I moved on to the second watch, known as Ostium Manor, constructing the main bridge first. I found myself once again tweaking the terrain to accommodate for its grand size, being the largest out of the 4 watches. This manor entrance, as it is known in English, may look more complex than the Lonely Chapel. However, it is actually quite relieving to be working on something as predictable as a structure that is in line with Minecraft's grid. Solarium Dorsum, or the back terrace, is the 3rd watch, set on the back right-hand side of Saxeus Castellum. Its name is due to its large back balcony on the lower levels I designed and the 4 corresponding balconies atop the diagonal tower placed above this small watch. Despite its connection via a bridge to the main cathedral, Solarium Dorsum seems to be the most outcast simply due to its steep incline and small stature when comparing to the other 3 watches. And finally, the most menacing of all 4, Tres Torres, or the 3 towers. Up until this point, the watches only included 1 key tower in their structures, so to change things up, I included 2 matching towers rotated 45 degrees in comparison to the main tower, and also designed them to be much shorter so I was still able to achieve that steep, steady incline. Despite building in the same style as the other watches, Tres Torres appears much more evil, partially due to its large front-facing design and 3 towers, but also its closeness to Saxeus Castellum, leaving little room for a wider bridge and more room for an eerie environment to grow between the 2 structures. And with the 4 watches complete, the build is coming to a close. However, despite no earlier plans of including any sort of organics in this build, I decided to include 4 dragons to allow for an amazing display of light in the darkness as they breathe their fire. The first of which being on opposing sides of the broken bridge that once led to the now lonely chapel. Once one was complete, I was able to copy and rotate the dragon to the opposite side and change the color of his skin in the flame for contrast. I designed the 2 fire drakes so that they could be facing each other and having their flames meet between the bridges in a fantastic display of fire. The second dragon I really actually had to put a lot of planning into, as I positioned him standing atop not 1 but actually 2 towers leaning against the crown tower of Saxeus Castle. Making his body slumped and his head bowed low, I made it so his flames blew through the buttresses of the main fortress and out into the frozen air, illuminating the upper levels of the cathedral. Saving the best for last, I built the final dragon in the most dynamic pose possible above Tres Torres. The drake was built in a way as to give the sense that it was cocking its head and changing directions to rain hellfire down upon the dark cathedral, creating a beautiful glow of flame in the night. And with the final dragon finished, Saxeus Castle is complete.